Order, order. We'll resume the committee hearings. Mrs Anne Main to move the motion.
Thank you, Sir Alan. I beg to move that this House has considered Bangladesh and its future. It's a very important debate today about the future and direction of travel in Bangladesh. I'm pleased to see that it's so well attended and there's a lot of people from the APPG here as well. I think it would be worth briefly revisiting, Sir Alan, how and why Bangladesh was born, why it emerged out of that cauldron that was East Pakistan against the background of the prospect of a loss of their official language of Bangla, and against a prospect then of greater Islamisation in the modern developing country, and that it has become today. Bangladesh is a young country, and it's had to make a long journey in a relatively short time. No one is saying that the journey to independence and democracy has been easy, and it's easy to be too judgmental and see that journey through the prism of our own long-established democratic processes. A process that the Prime Minister of Bangladesh has told me is one that they model themselves on, namely our democracy. I think it's important to briefly remind ourselves today of those dreams and ideals for Bangladesh when Sheikh Mujibur Rahman led his people to victory in the battle for independence. It is most important that as friends of Bangladesh that we ask today what is the direction of travel for Bangladesh some 44 years later, and what more can be done by the UK to help the people of Bangladesh on its path to fulfilling its potential and delivering a future that upholds the ideals of peaceful secularism, prosperity and political engagement. It's vital that we, as the biggest bilateral donors to Bangladesh, act as a critical friend and offer help and support where we can. With the most recent figures showing the UK contribution of over £250 million, it's important that taxpayers' money is protected from corruption and is spent wisely, transparently and effectively in helping Bangladesh on that journey. A recent Independent Aid Commission report on Bangladesh observed that poverty levels have fallen under 45% as a result of steady growth, industrialisation and greater access to finance, which has led to improvements in a range of social indicators such as adult literacy, child malnutrition and infant mortality, and that the agricultural sector accounts for only 18% of GDP. However, a number of factors nevertheless point to continuing vulnerability. Many Bangladeshis still live under the poverty line, and an estimated 77% of the population live under $2 a day. And there is a marked income and social inequality. Resilience to shocks cannot be guaranteed. So it's vitally important that we help Bangladesh achieve its Millennium Goals of eradicating extreme poverty and hunger, achieving universal primary education, promoting gender equality and empowerment of women, reducing child mortality, improving maternal health care and combating HIV, AIDS, malaria and other diseases. And I know that good progress has been made in those goals, and given the criticism we get from some quarters on the largesse of our aid budget, I would urge the Minister to consider giving an update to the House as a whole at some point soon on the progress that has been made in those areas. That said, corruption is rife in Bangladesh, and over all the aid projects scrutinised under the Independent Aid Commission, ICIA, in all the countries that we support, it shows that 34% of all our aid projects in the countries that we support are showing amber or red, giving cause for concern. So does the Minister today have any updates on how many of our aid schemes in Bangladesh are running on green, and how are these schemes being audited to ensure that we know we are getting value for money from the taxpayer and delivering real benefit in the country that we want to help? It's been observed to me on many occasions that Bangladesh was born of blood and suffering, and that no election ever since then in Bangladesh has not been a result in blood and suffering or ever been peacefully delivered. And that, I believe, is a great shame, and it's something I'll touch on later in the debate. But over the last few days, many members here will have had the opportunity to meet the visiting Prime Minister of Bangladesh, Sheikh Hasina. And of course, it was her father, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, in 1971, who led the call to arms to fight for the independence of his country on his road to Rumna speech in March 7th. And he said then, and I think it's worth looking at this because this was the aim and the goal that they set themselves. And he said that I'm requesting you are my brothers, do not make this country a hell and destroy it. We will not see each other's face in the future. If we can solve things in a peaceful manner, we can at least live as brothers. And that's why I'm requesting you, do not try and run military rule in my country. Hindus, Muslims, Bengalis and non-Bengalis, and all those who live in this Bangla are our brothers. And the responsibility of protecting them is upon you. Ensure that our reputation is not smeared in any way. If one more shot is fired and if my people are killed again, then my request to you is build a fortress in each and every home. Face the enemy with whatever you have. Now, it's important that he was, even then, in the call to arms, stating how relevant it would be to a country, if they did receive independence, to be secular and inclusive. And he went on to say, the struggle this time is a struggle for our emancipation, and the struggle this time is for independence. But it was also that vital struggle for secularism and the wish to live in peacefulness with their fellows. And that December of 1971, Bangladesh was born. And I know there are disputes and concerns over war crimes from that time and disputes over the persecution of perpetrators of those crimes today. But that's not an issue I wish to explore. I particularly wish to stress today that whoever's governing Bangladesh now and in its future, it's imperative that all aspects of human rights are protected and observed, and that the freedom of speech is championed. All efforts must be made to ensure forthright and fair political engagement. I have been concerned about allegations of political harassment, concerns over malicious destabilisation of the country through acts of violence by some groups who certainly do not hold those high ideals that Mujibur Rahman expressed in 1971. So no avenues must be left unexplored in supporting Bangladesh's avowed commitment to secularism and its avowed commitment to ensuring fair and transparent electoral processes, and most importantly, its role in protecting the rights of religious minorities. Anything this government can do to help Bangladesh navigate this tricky path would be most helpful. It's worth noting that in October 2010, the High Court in Bangladesh declared Bangladesh is now a secular state. Everybody has religious freedom, and therefore no man, woman or child can be forced to wear religious attires like a burqa. And this was a welcome public statement and well-timed reiteration of Bangladesh's origins, born out of a desire to resist that pull of fundamentalism. In today's uncertain world, with fundamentalism on the rise, this stance is something we should applaud and nurture. Too many young people in our own country are heeding the siren call of religious fundamentalism and travelling abroad to support terrorists and join in jihad. We need Bangladesh to hold the line against an uncertain world and stand up for secularism and freedom of speech. Only recently, there have been some widely reported attacks on individuals in Bangladesh, and they are a worry. 4 bloggers have been brutally murdered since February 2014. In February, Ahmed Rajib Haidar was killed outside his home amid tensions over a tribunal judging war crimes. In February 2015, a Bangladesh-born American blogger, Avich Roy, was similarly killed with machetes and knives as he walked back from a book fair in Dhaka. Sorry, my page is stuck together. And in March 2013, Wasika Rahman, 27, was hacked to death by 2 men, yet again with knives and meat cleavers, just outside his house as he headed to work, travelling in Dhaka. And in May, Anata Bajoy Das, 32, was killed as he left his home on his way to work at a bank. 4 masked men again attacking him to death with cleavers. Now, these atrocities have been linked to freedom of speech and perceived religious insults. The government has made arrests, but this is a worrying direction of travel. Does the Minister have any views or updates on this? On the bigger picture, we are all aware that the rumbling along in the background of these individual incidents is the unhappiness of the opposition parties, and particularly the BNP, over the abolition of the caretaker system. And their lack of engagement in the current electoral process is a sad one. It must be said there's been a history on both sides of unhappiness with the caretaker government, depending on who's been in charge. And this has been since 1991. I'm sure it won't have escaped the Minister's notice that it's been reported even in today's edition of the Daily Star, widely read by many of our constituents, that protesters from the BNP were demonstrating outside our own parliament yesterday against the visit by Sheikh Hasina. And the newspaper observed, and I thought quite fairly, that wings and influences of both the BNP and the Awami League have now spread to many countries, and that these parties campaign and protest against each other outside Bangladesh. It's regrettable that such political enmity and unhappiness is travelling so far, and indeed sweeping up supporters in our own country. We need a way forward, and we need to help break this impasse. Whatever the outcome of any future election in Bangladesh, I wish to say that it's vital all sides feel it's one they're not excluded from, or feel that they cannot partake in, which is why I'm sure I certainly will give way.
Very much with what one member is saying, and would she agree with me that the priority for Bangladesh and the role of the UK in its relationship with Bangladesh is to facilitate in some way at some point a peaceful transition of power from one side to the other? I, like her, have talked to many colleagues, supporters of either side of the political divide in Bangladesh, and a sense of grievance is legitimate and a real one on each side, but until there is that peaceful transition of power on one occasion, these problems will simply go on. Yes.
And me.
I do agree with him, and I can't lay my hand on it now, but indeed I had a... Oh, there it is. I had a letter, I wrote about this to Baroness Vazi in January 2014, particularly raising that issue. And she said in her letter, I called on both sides to put a stop to disruption and violence and to focus on political dialogue. They both have a responsibility to ensure a stable and secure Bangladesh. We have always made clear how this process is managed is a matter for Bangladesh, and I think we are referring to the caretaker government system or not. But she went on to say, I issued a statement on the 6th of January noting that the UK, like others in the international community, believes the true mark of a mature, functioning democracy is peaceful elections that express the genuine will of voters. And she finished by saying it's an urgent priority that all Bangladesh's political parties must share a clear, unequivocal responsibility to work together to strengthen democratic accountability and build the willingness and capacity to hold future participatory elections without fear of intimidation or reprisals. And she said the UK is encouraging Bangladesh's political parties to support political dialogue, and we will continue to work with international partners, including the European Union, to help achieve this. And I'm hoping the Minister today may have a bit of an update on that, because that letter was written to me on the 24th of January 2014, so that's 18 months ago nearly now, and I'm hoping there has been some progress in that. And in fact, the Independent Commission for Aid Impact in May 2014, when evaluating Bangladesh, the country, said the long-running political rivalries have paralysed the government decision-making in recent years. Bangladesh is in need of an infrastructure upgrades and advances in its public service delivery systems. But the actual squabbling that's going on and disputes that is going is actually hampering that, and that cannot be good for the country. And indeed, Minister, you yourself sent me a response in February of this year where you said that I share your deep concern about the escalating political unrest and absence of political dialogue amongst Bangladesh's political parties. I raised my concerns about continuing violence and political harassment when I met Bangladesh's Minister for Law, Justice and Parliamentary Affairs on the 20th of January. And you concluded by saying, together with our international partners, we will continue to urge all political parties to work together to resolve their differences through constructive and peaceful dialogue. And as the Honourable Member opposite said, this is something that's been going on a long time, and it really has got to be brought to some sort of conclusion without us interfering, but somehow helping the process on the way. You said the High Commissioner, our High Commissioner, along with other EU ambassadors, met Bangladesh's Foreign Minister, Mr Mahmood Ali, on the 14th of January to express our collective concern at the ongoing violence, and I think this was the phrase that struck me the most, and the shrinking of the democratic space. And I think today, Minister, I would ask you to see if you could update the members here today as to whether or not there has been any progress in expanding that political space, or indeed has it been contracting even further. So only on Monday, Sheikh Hasina addressed members at an event in the CPA room, and she was warmly welcomed. She made a point of reaffirming her government's commitment to upholding secularism and tackling terrorism. She has had praise from Prime Minister Modi of India for her efforts in tackling terrorism, even if he somewhat spoiled the effect by his comments that she wasn't doing badly for a woman, so probably damned by faint praise. But I would welcome the Minister telling us what more can be done to help the Prime Minister of Bangladesh make further progress against the destabilising effects of terrorism and religious persecution in Bangladesh, and what more can be done to encourage and facilitate full participation by all groups in that electoral process. As we know from our own democracy, strong participatory opposition parties scrutinising our government and holding it to account makes for robust legislation and fairer government for all. The Minister will know that having visited Bangladesh 5 times, I take a keen interest in the country, and my most recent visit was in 2013 as chair of the APPG for Bangladesh, and I'm pleased to see we have members here who went on that visit. And it was a cross-party group visit to investigate and report on the tragedy of Rana Plaza. And this catastrophe led to the deaths of 1,100 people, and many more being left crippled through catastrophic injuries. The ready-made garment industry is crucial to the prosperity of Bangladesh, and as the recent Independent Commission for Aid Impact case study said, economic growth has come mainly from the abundant source of largely unskilled and cheap labour. The RMG sector has taken advantage of the situation and now employs around 4 million workers, mainly female, and accounts for 80% of manufactured exports. The recent international attention on Bangladesh's ready-made garment sector in the wake of the safety disaster such as Rana Plaza, is proving a challenge to the government rather than an opportunity to reform the RMG sector. And I would welcome the Minister to comment on that, because I think our report was very, very keen to see what progress could be made after Rana Plaza and after the big efforts that were made by our government to try and support the country in moving its way forward to having infrastructure resilience, having fairer work practices, and ensuring that the country, which is big its export, the garment from the country, is actually something that they can be proud of and have a secure future, rather than it actually not moving on a lot. Now, I know the Prime Minister has given us assurances that much has been done, but I have to say I would welcome hearing from our own Minister whether or not there's been any inspections, whether or not there's been any updates about the aid and the expertise that we sent in light of that. And I think that was where I'd like to conclude it for the moment and say that I know many other members will bring up other issues. But I do wish Bangladesh well. I think it has so much to offer. We are friends of Bangladesh, but we're not critical friends of Bangladesh. We need to ensure that aid money is being well used, well targeted, and where it's not, it's redirected, and we need to ensure that we follow up and make sure that we get the progress back. And I think that will help satisfy many of the critics that have of our aid budget if they know the money is going and helping form and mould and support a country that is independent, is secular, and is a bulwark against the fundamentalist Islamism that we are seeing affect so many of our young people in our own country today. So they may need our help, they may need a bit more coaxing, they may need a bit more effort put in, and I would like the Minister to give us some update today on where we are in the bigger picture.
The question is that this House has considered Bangladesh and its future. Before we proceed on the debate, I'd just like to make one or two announcements. The first is that an apology, really, because I did say to Jim Fitzpatrick at the beginning that I thought it was getting a little bit warm, and I think if members or the Minister would like to take their coats off, it would be fine by me. And apologies for not doing that a little bit earlier. How I intend to proceed also is that we've got a full list of speakers, and I do hope that everybody here participates in some ways, but it will mean that we're fairly restricted on times. I do intend to call the three front benches, the official opposition government and the SNP, at 3:30. But before that, the debate amongst backbenchers, which means about 8 or 10 minutes per speaker. So I'll proceed now on to the debate. Mr. Christian Matheson.
Chairman, thank you. And can I congratulate the Honourable Member for St Albans on what I consider to be a very measured and considered opening speech that's raised a lot of the issues that I myself see as are necessary. And also, if I may congratulate her on the leadership that she's providing to the APPG. I've not been here very long, but it's clear that she is very well thought of in the role that she undertakes, and I pay tribute to her for that. I also had the privilege to meet Sheikh Hasina as part of her visit earlier this week when she came into this place. And I strongly support the efforts that she is undertaking as Prime Minister in some very difficult circumstances, Chairman, to introduce a civil society based on secularism. And the Honourable Member for St Albans talked about the UK being a critical friend, and we absolutely have a role in this, but not just, I have to say, with the Bangladeshi government, because there are many British, Western European corporations who are working in Bangladesh and who are taking advantage of those very cheap labour conditions to produce goods at very cheap rates that, frankly, I believe have a responsibility to the Bangladeshis and to the Bangladeshi government of Sheikh Hasina to treat their workers decently. I will give way to my honourable friend.
I'm grateful to you for giving way. As you know, in 2013, more than 1,100 garment workers were killed when the Rana Plaza complex in Bangladesh collapsed. Many of the clothes made are destined for the British High Street. Do you agree that we need to improve the rights, the pay and indeed the safety of the workers in Bangladesh? And do you further agree that the government should reverse its decision to cut support to the International Labour Organisation?
Absolutely, and I will develop that argument, Sir Alan, in the course of the next couple of minutes. And I have to say, ILO standards are the most basic of standards. They're basic minimums, and there shouldn't be a problem about us addressing them. But there is a responsibility on Western corporations, and obviously in this place we particularly look at British corporations, to ensure that they treat employees in Bangladesh decently and fairly, because there are siren calls, as the Honourable Member spoke so eloquently. There are siren calls from fundamentalist Islam within Bangladesh that will sound a whole lot more attractive and will fall on much more fertile ground if the ordinary working people in Bangladesh continue to see exploitation within the garment industry and others. So I absolutely support the work of Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, and it's interesting that not only do I offer that support, but the Bangladeshi community over here that I know of is also very keen to support that. I was very pleased to attend a reception recently at the Chester Tandoori restaurant with my good friend Mr. Abdul Noor for the visiting police superintendent from Sylhet district. The small community in Chester was paying tribute to this police officer because they'd met him when they were out there and were very impressed by the work of his as an up-and-coming police leader. They particularly talked about the work that he was undertaking in eradicating corruption, because they simply want to be able to work out there and to work fairly, and for the system to work fairly. And at last, the part of the new regime was eradicating corruption. And he was in the lead on that, and he was also introducing what for them seemed a novel new strategy, which was policing by consent, winning support for the police across the society, and therefore developing that structure of civic society. So there is absolute support for the kind of measures that the Honourable Lady has talked about to develop civic society, but we have a role in here to put pressure on British companies and Western companies to make sure that they do not exploit their employees in Bangladesh simply for the sake of short-term profit, because the long-term strategic error of allowing fertile ground for extremism will be extremely damaging to those companies themselves, as well as to the UK's long-term interest. And I believe that we have a responsibility to the UK to ensure that those companies that are benefiting fulfil those responsibilities. And I have to say as well, Chairman, we also have responsibilities. I like a bargain the same as the next honourable member. And I will go along to one of the large supermarkets and maybe feel happy that I'm paying not quite as expensive a price as I might for a garment made in Bangladesh. But if the price of treating poor workers in Bangladesh fairly is that we have to pay a little bit extra for a shirt or a pair of trousers, I think that's a price worth paying if it helps to secure long-term stability. I give way to the Honourable Lady.
Next, I would confirm, when we were actually over there, it was what was the cause of the Rana Plaza collapse was poor building conditions, and it wouldn't have mattered how much those workers were being paid. It was the corruption that had gone on before with the infrastructure that led to those buildings being unsafe and unstable. So, it's the two things, and that's what we need to work on.
I absolutely accept that, but what the workers are paid is something that can very much be in the control of Western corporations, and therefore in the control of us to put pressure on them. Chairman, I want to talk briefly in the time remaining about the work that I've previously undertaken with the shipbreakers on the beaches south of Chittagong, some of the worst employed workers in the world, with absolutely no health and safety protection at all in some of the most dangerous areas of work. And the workers, if they were lucky, might have a pair of sunglasses to act as eye protection when they were using metal cutters. They'd be sent onto ships. Some of them would be big bulk carriers, some oil ships, told to cut through pieces of metal. They might be cutting, they don't know, but they'd be cutting through into the fuel tanks. Gases would have built up, and workers would be killed. And that was a very common occurrence, Sir Alan, that workers would die on the ships. I was told when I was there, this is about 4 years ago now, that 3 or 4 deaths a week in each shipbreaking yard was absolutely average. And indeed, the week before I arrived there, it was reported that 5 such workers had died. In fact, had been reported died, but his body, I was told, was simply thrown overboard so that the shipbreaking owner wouldn't have to pay compensation to his family. I hope that in the period since I was last there, that responsibility by shipbreaking owners has continued, but the conditions in which those workers worked was absolutely appalling. And again, it is something that, in the words of the Honourable Lady, when we are being a critical friend of Bangladesh, it is something that we need to put pressure onto the government of Bangladesh so they will put on pressure onto the shipbreaking owners. Child labour was also a problem there. I was told at the time by workers within the shipbreaking yards, no, there is no child labour problem. And I couldn't understand it because there were young boys ahead of me, in front of me, that I could see were child labourers. It turned out that in Bangladesh, the age of adulthood was 15. I still consider, and I believe my honourable friend, the member for Neath, talks about ILO standards. I believe that if a young boy is 15, that is still child labour by international standards, and it should be discouraged, and we should be supporting the eradication of child labour within those shipbreaking yards, not least because of the huge dangers that they face. But in terms of the garment workers, and my honourable friend for Neath did mention the Rana Plaza, one of the problems is that all the workers are very fractured. There are many, many unions that cannot see eye to eye, and there are many. There seems to be a lot of disagreement, and in those kind of circumstances, it will be easy for unscrupulous employers to take advantage of them. So I would hope that there would be some work in helping to develop trade unions within Bangladesh, because, as I strongly believe, the best way to improve conditions is for the workers to improve themselves by joining together to give themselves that collective strength. But I congratulate the Honourable Lady, and I share the concerns that she talks about some of the assurances that she's looking for the Minister. I will wait for the Minister's response with interest. Sir Alan, I thank you for the opportunity.
Mr Markfield.
Thank you, sir. And, over the past 6 years, I've had the great privilege of serving as Vice Chairman of the All-Party Group under my honourable friend for St Albans chairmanship. Now, there are quite a lot of ethnic and national groups, obviously, in my own central London constituency, but I have a fairly significant Bengali population, some in the City of London, but actually a significant number in South Westminster and in Pimlico. So it's an issue of which, and the issues which is raised, of which I'm very much aware. I've myself twice visited Bangladesh. First, obviously, to go to Dhaka, the capital, but also specifically to the Sylhet region in the northeast of the country, where many indigenous British Bengalis come from originally. In that instance, to promote grassroots football. And on that trip, we met both Sheikh Hasina and the opposition leader at the time, Khalid Zia. That was back in 2010. Now, half of Britain's estimated 500,000 Bangladeshis live here in London. And that may account for the growing success of that community's young people who are benefiting from the education and job opportunities on their doorstep. Some 61% of Bangladeshis got 5 good GCSEs in 2014, compared with 51% of the Pakistani population and 56% of the indigenous white British population. And certainly I've been incredibly struck. The great majority of Bengalis who I represent in Parliament live in social housing. Many came here perhaps speaking very little English and with very few conventional skills. But the passion they have for education, something we should all be very proud of. It applies actually to many of our immigrant populations in this country. Quite uniquely, if you look at the experience in places like France and Germany, it's a very different story. And it's something I think we in this country should be very proud of. But there is a sense that many of our immigrant populations recognise the way out of the economic difficulties that they face and that they probably will face for the rest of their lives is education for their children, to give their children a better life. And that's something that we should all work hard to encourage. But bordering my constituency, Sir Alan, is of course Tower Hamlets, which is of course the heart of the Bangladeshi community here in Great Britain. We're all familiar with the sometimes negative press coverage of elements of that borough in recent years, but that is only a very small part of the story of Tower Hamlets today. And I say that as I look into the eyes of my constituency neighbour and the Honourable Member for Poplar and Limehouse. He knows, as well as I do, that it is an incredibly vibrant borough, in producing aspirational and motivated young people who are going into the tech and banking jobs in Canary Wharf, in his constituency, as well as crossing the border to the west to the City of London. I think it is great also to see that the Honourable Member for Bethnal Green and Bow is leading the charge when it comes to parliamentary representation from that community. I understand there are now 3 female Bangladeshis in the Commons representing London seats, and I think that's something we should again be very proud of. But there does remain, however, some major tensions and political problems in Bangladesh, and as my honourable friend rightly pointed out, they sadly, to an extent, do spill over even into this country, and some of the factionalism within the main political parties, and indeed with a whole group of smaller parties that we see close to hand. I do think we have to watch very particularly for the creeping influence of Jamaat-e-Islami, which is thought to have founded the Islamic Forum of Europe, which has been promoted in London's mosques, in particular the East London Mosque down the Whitechapel Road. As members will be aware, in the recent past I have been very vocal in this House about the persecution of religious minorities in the Middle East, particularly the ancient Christian communities such as the Copts, numbering some 8.5 million in Egypt, and of course the 2 million Christians who, well, up until recently at least, resided in Syria, many of whom go back to communities that were proselytized by St. Paul in the immediate aftermath of the birth of Christianity. Precious little, however, is said, I think, about the situation for religious minorities in Bangladesh, which I'm afraid has deteriorated in tandem with the rapid rise of militant Islam and the influence it's having on Bangladeshi politics. I should like to take this opportunity of this particular debate to raise the plight of the 20 million Hindus, Buddhists, Christians and other indigenous minorities who are living currently in Bangladesh. Since the verdict by the International Crimes Tribunal in February of 2013, which handed a life sentence to the leading Jamaat-e-Islami figure for war crimes in 1971, members of Jamaat have responded by destroying many places of worship and murdering and attacking innocent people for the religious views, as has been pointed out. This is incredibly depressing, and what is particularly depressing is that, as I say, with a young and vibrant population getting a much stronger education, that applies in Bangladesh as well as within our own diaspora here in the United Kingdom. This is a country that should be looking to the future, not constantly harping back onto the past. Yes, there were terrible things that happened 44 years ago, dreadful things on all sides of that particular divide. And I think it ill behoves any government to utilise its position in power and manoeuvre with the judiciary to give a one-sided approach towards this in the way that has happened. Clearly, justice has to be done to a certain extent, and I accept there's an element of a reconciliation that has to take place. But the worry is that this whole episode will just continue in a downward spiral in years to come, with different sets of politicians taking the opportunity to make their own very narrow partisan points without looking for the future of the country. As my honourable friend rightly points out, the current ruling Awami League is nominally secular and has promised to bring the ageing leaders of Jamaat to justice for their role in this 1971 genocide. But in the face of that violence and the broader band of Islamists, this is, of course, no easy task, and attacks on those minority communities in Bangladesh are, I fear, a frequent and continuous event, and one that may well continue going forward. I would very much reiterate the message from my honourable friend earlier about the importance of maintaining that secular society. We are very lucky that relationship we have with Bangladesh has, to a large extent, kept terrorism at bay, but we cannot in any way be complacent about that, particularly with large numbers of Bengalis in this country who potentially are being influenced by the events that are taking place in their homeland. So I think, of course.
And May.
Well, and I have been told, but I have no proof of it, that Jamaat is actively funded by Islamists in Pakistan to help fund their disruption of the country of Bangladesh. Yeah. So these things are interlinked.
Yeah, they are. And of course, one of the difficulties is, of course, we're fighting the battles pre-1971. And in many ways, because of this upsurge in religious cases, it gets back into a downward spiral with an eye on the past rather than on the future. I wanted just briefly, if I may, in summing up, Salon, say this. Bangladesh, as everyone knows, is the 8th most populous country in the world. By 2025, it is estimated that that substantial population will be reach the level of 190 million, of which, by that stage, some 43% will be under the age of 30. There is little doubt that many of the problems that Bangladesh has at the moment do relate to poverty, to a lack of education amongst some of its young people, although, as I say, I think there are some significant improvements. How Bangladesh retains educated professionals and builds a future for them within Bangladesh is going to be one of the very biggest challenges going forward. And I hope that we can play our part in this country, given the passion that clearly is shown with a large Bengali diaspora here, to ensure that, that there is a better future for Bangladesh. We will no doubt have many more of these debates, I suspect, going forward. And I hope that it will be, as I say, with a sense of friendship. And whilst we must, as my honourable friend rightly says, be critical friends at various times, equally there is so much good to be said about that country, and we want to play our part in making sure that the world gets to see that too.
Jim Fitzpatrick.
Sir Alan, thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to see you presiding over business this afternoon, sir. I look forward to hearing the Minister and my honourable friend, the Shadow Minister, indeed the SNP spokesperson, responding to this debate in due course. I pay tribute to the Honourable Lady, the Chair of the All-Party Bangladesh Group, for the way that she has led the group with distinction and enthusiasm. She did know I was thinking of challenging her for chairship of the group earlier on, but then I thought that would be entirely churlish, given how well she's led us for 5 years. And I probably couldn't have beaten her anyway, so I thought that was entirely fatuous on my part. But I'm delighted that she secured this debate. I'm very pleased that she secured it under the title Future of Bangladesh, which is very much where we all want to see looking forward. Notwithstanding that she also covered the history, which has been also referred to by the other two speakers. It's a pleasure to follow my honourable neighbour and friend in this debate. And indeed, in this debate, we are all friends, because we're all friends of Bangladesh. We may be in different sides of the chamber, but we all want to see the best for that country. And it's not our role, and I know that we all agree on this, and all the speakers so far have touched upon it, that we don't play sides in Bangladesh. We're not supporters of the Awami League or supporters of the Bangladesh National Party. Whichever party won the support of the Bangladesh people, I know I have, and I know other colleagues have as well, we've supported the government of Bangladesh, whether it was Bangladesh National Party or Awami League. I think the honourable gentleman made some very pertinent points, however, about some of the political organisations within Bangladesh, Jamaat-e-Islami in particular, which is the sister organisation for the Islamic Forum of Europe, which does such bad influencing of our young people here in the UK. And of course, Jamaat has been an ally of the Awami League in previous elections, but in more recent years has been associated with the Bangladesh National Party, which is really disturbing because, as has been referred to, Bangladesh has a proud secular history. And again, one of the other matters which has already been raised is the violence against minority communities. And I know that the Bangladesh government wants to do more in making sure that they protect minority communities, and we all want to see that it needs to redouble those efforts, because those attacks are deeply disturbing for a country which was founded to be a secular democracy. When the Awami League boycotted the last BNP election victory, I criticised the Awami League for that boycott. When the BNP boycotted the elections 2 years ago, I criticised the BNP. Many of us thought the BNP could even have won that election, and I think the boycott was a completely wrong thing to do. My honourable friend made reference to the confidence within the electoral processes, and the United Kingdom, the European Union, the United States, international organisations have a huge role to play in rebuilding the confidence within Bangladesh about transitional arrangements, about the confidence in elections. The UK government played a huge role in validating the electoral roll in Bangladesh, where 80 million voters were registered in a period of 18 months, and demonstrated that we should have confidence in the electoral structures and the electoral arrangements within Bangladesh and for future elections. And there is a lot of pressure to accelerate those elections, They have got to be timed to have the confidence of the international community as well as the confidence of the Bangladeshi people, so that the outcome will be respected internally as well as externally. We all know, and reference has been made to the fact that Bangladesh is one of the poorest countries in the world. It's one of those most vulnerable to climate change. It's one of the poorest peoples in the world. But it's got a growth rate of 6% for the past 5 to 10 years. A growth rate that we would all bite our hands off for, were we able to do it. And that's not a criticism of the government's economic plan, which we all know is not really working that well, notwithstanding whatever the Conservatives say. But 6% growth rates we would all love to see. But one of the side products of that, of course, is the disaster at Rana Plaza, when the acceleration has meant that regulation has fallen behind protection of workers, wages, conditions, whatever. It was very reassuring to read in an email this week from Green Grade, an organisation the Honourable Lady invited to present to the All-Party Group last year, which is engaged in helping garment workers and garment factory owners improve the standing of that industry, saying that Rana Plaza workers will get full compensation, and that the Donor Trust Fund has reached its $30 million target this year, set up by the ILO, and that victims and families will get some compensation. And a number of colleagues will also know that I'm patron of the Sripur Village Orphanage, which has been running now in Bangladesh for 25 years. And I'm proud that the Sripur Orphanage helped a whole number of children who were made orphans by Rana Plaza to actually be housed and homed and to be looked after. And clearly there is a lot of good coming out of a very, very tragic story. I'm very happy to give way to Honourable Lady.
The Honourable Gentleman has been a little too modest. It's his wife that runs the Sripur Orphanage. She's absolutely fabulous. She came to present to the APPG, and I pay tribute to his efforts and her efforts for rescuing children from exploitation they may have gone into as a result of Rana Plaza. Well,
it's very generous of the Honourable Lady to mention my wife is a trustee. The orphanage was set up by Pat Kerr, who was BA cabin crew, lady born in Scotland. And it has now 500 women, 500 children and 150 destitute mums. And it is a huge success story in terms of looking after women and children for the past 25 years, and does go from strength to strength, and I know has a lot of support within the House, including from the Honourable Lady. I just want to make quick reference to elections, and I've already said we need to build the confidence in the electoral process in Bangladesh. And of course, when the accusations are made about corruption and fraud, as the Honourable Member very generously and lightly made reference to in Tower Hamlets, we are not unused to corruption and fraud. Our Mayor recently was taken out by the Election Court for corruption and fraud. And it was great to see Sheikh Hasina here this week and giving commitments about the drive towards rebuilding the confidence within Bangladesh. For those institutions and for those procedures and for that electoral process. And incidentally, it was great to see her niece, our honourable friend, the member for Hampstead and Kilburn, making her very impressive maiden speech yesterday. She will be a real asset to our benches, but to the whole House in due course. And the Prime Minister of Bangladesh is rightly very proud of her. I'm very happy to give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
I'd just say as well that it was fantastic when Sheikh Hasina came over to see the Honourable Member for Hampstead and Kilburn's older brother speaking about the wonderful work that he's been doing over there in terms of extending broadband. And as we're talking about the future of Bangladesh, I just want to reiterate the point about the fact that corruption, fraud, and particularly demonstrations that were happening over here as well the day before at a community event with Sheikh Hasina in London really may hinder the future of Bangladesh unless we get that right over the next few years.
The Honourable Gentleman makes a very important point, Sir Alan. I think the role of the All-Party Group, which the Honourable Lady so well leads, is really important. We have a very significant role to play in trying to help bring the two sides together. Lord Avebury from the other place has been working on this for many years. There needs to be dialogue. The good news is that for the past few months, the situation in Bangladesh is quieter than it has been for the best part of 2 years. If the country is going to get back to having a normal political future, then that needs to continue. We have great respect as parliamentarians in Bangladesh. This debate, I know, will be covered in the Dhaka Daily Star. It will be featured on Bangladesh TV here in the UK and back in Dhaka and in Select. The message that I know we collectively want to give to the Bangladesh government is that we are your friends. We are here to help. We want to do everything we can to see continued progress in the country, which has made such fantastic progress in the last 40-odd years. And we are a resource and an asset. And I know that the Minister, when he responds, and the Shadow Minister, I'm sure the Honourable Lady from the SNP also will reinforce that. That we are all in the same end game, which is helping Bangladesh keep moving forward. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity to contribute to this debate, Sir Alan.
Jonathan Reynolds.
Thank you very much, Mr. Meelan. Can I add my tribute to the Honourable Member for St Albans for securing this debate, giving us all a chance to put on the record our views on the future of Bangladesh. And can I also thank her for her work as the chair of the APPG. She and I spent a great deal of time on the roads of Dhaka travelling around Bangladesh on our last visit. There's no doubt her commitment is absolutely genuine, and I also am pleased to see her continue in that role. I just want to add a few comments, Sir Alan, to the very distinguished speeches that we've had already in this debate, just to say that I think Bangladesh is a country with a tremendous future, a country with a really important relationship to the UK, and the challenges that they have can be overcome, but they need to be addressed, and they are, I think, quite important ones. In doing so, I'd just like to briefly pay tribute to my own British Bangladeshi population in my constituency. In Hyde, we have quite a substantial community. I've got to be honest, I am someone who didn't grow up with a great deal of diversity. I grew up in a very white working class part of the northeast of England, and so I wasn't familiar really until my adult life with any sort of diversity. In fact, I acutely remember being at university at Manchester, experiencing Eid for the first time, and I lived just at the edge of Rusholme, and I remember everyone coming down the road with horns beeping and flags waving, and I thought, honestly, there must have been an explosion or something like that in Rusholme, and everyone was fleeing to safety. But I think when you represent an area and people take the time to tell you about their faith or their backgrounds or their history or their culture, and they invite you into their homes and they share that experience with you, that is a wonderful part of the job that we all do, and I think we don't talk about that sometimes enough. It is a wonderful part of being an MP, and it's something I treasure a great deal. We've not been without our challenges, Sir Alan. We've had, as many communities have had, situations such as in 2012 when we had an invasion, is the word I would use, from the English Defence League, coming to Hyde, harassing people there, trying to exploit community tensions and trying to get a foothold in the community. And when you see moments like that, your community standing together, people of different backgrounds, again, different political views, different ethnicities, standing together and saying, no, we don't welcome, in fact, we oppose this kind of invasion of our town. That, again, is a very special thing. And I personally think we are not tough enough on organisations like the EDL, who come in, tell people who are second and third generation British citizens that they shouldn't be here. They should not have the right to do that. They, of course, have the right to express their view. But equally, we must protect our own citizens going about their lives in a peaceful and fair way. It is my hope in future, when we talk about the relationship between the UK and Bangladesh, that the very impressive economic performance in Bangladesh will further strengthen that relationship for all the political problems in forming governments and peaceful transitions of power in Bangladesh. As my honourable friend said, the growth rate in Bangladesh is something we very much aspire to in the UK. And if you look at the language and the discourse in the UK around countries like India and China, or the Mint countries, the next 11 countries of which Bangladesh is part, could become, if you like, the vogue, fashionable countries that this country wants a relationship with in future. And I think the existing links that we have in the UK could be a tremendous asset, not just to the UK as a whole, but to towns like mine that I represent. And I very much hope that will become something. Yes, I'll give way to my friend.
Travel the roads of Dhaka. But the important thing that we saw when we were over there is the power lines draped outside buildings, the roads that were kind of like you felt you had to put your hands over your eyes and travel on them. If businesses keep investing and trusting in Bangladesh, we need to see that infrastructure growth, and that's why I would like to see from the Minister some comments today. Does he share my concern? Infrastructure growth and resilience to support that growth is very important.
Well, I absolutely do agree with him. I want to briefly mention three issues that we found when we went to Bangladesh, and three issues that I think are quite important for the future in relation to that. And of course, the first is the context of our visit to Bangladesh, which was, as other members have raised, the Rana Plaza disaster, one of the worst industrial accidents the world has seen. 1,100 people dying and coming as it did just after the Tazreen Fashions fire, which killed a further 112 people. Clearly, this is something that very much needs to be addressed in terms of the development of Bangladesh's economy. I'll be quite honest, I went out there perhaps with a predetermined view that this was primarily an issue of exploitation of Western companies using the cheap labour rates of Bangladesh to make their products. And I still believe there's a duty on Western companies, not just morally, but in terms of their own reputation and brand, to make sure their supply chains are transparent and they're doing what they can. But there clearly is a complexity in the situation there. The standards which the Western factories adhere to that export to this country are clearly of a higher standard than the domestic garment industry in Bangladesh. And a lot of the issues that we encountered are not just issues of how Western companies behave and the labour standards there, but really of the whole system of governance in Bangladesh and the good governance that's needed, the need, as ever, to root out corruption. Those are absolutely central challenges, and I think they come very much to what the Honourable Member said, but also to my second point, which is the political culture and the political violence in Bangladesh and how that has to change. I'm sure all of us who have an interest in Bangladesh have had at times, particularly I imagine in Tower Hamlets, situations where people want to take our photo or ask us to give a comment endorsing one side or other in regional or national elections or perhaps in historical disputes in Bangladesh. And I completely understand that there are very legitimate grievances on either side of the political history of Bangladesh. But my message to those people is always that there is so much to be gained from trying to find a way through that and trying to find a way so we have a peaceful transition of power in Bangladesh. For all the differences between our sides of the House or all sides of the House now, we can honestly say that if one side wins an election, which is usually the Conservative Party, we are willing to give up the keys to Downing Street. And actually, I was surprised by how much interest there was when I was in Bangladesh, that people were genuinely taken aback that we were an all-party delegation. They clearly couldn't really relate to that in that way. But the fact that the rules of any political system are adhered to, the rule of law is adhered to, is absolutely central. And if either side can bring themselves to a position where they're able to have faith in that, perhaps through the mediation and support of countries like ourselves, there is a huge future for Bangladesh, and that would be extremely important and an extremely important way to proceed. At present, the political violence in Bangladesh is clearly a continuing concern. I asked for some figures from the library. I believe over 120 people have been killed this year as a result of political violence, half of which are believed to have been burnt to death. And I think it would be terrible if people took that as an indication of the whole country of Bangladesh, because Bangladesh is so much more than statistics like that. A country that I think a lot of people, not just people with an ethnic or historical link to Bangladesh, want to visit, want to have a relationship with, want to do business with, because the investment in this country, in Bangladesh, is clearly of huge importance to our economy as well as it is to Bangladesh, and it's so important that we can try and get past this. The final point, Sir Alan, I wanted to make in the time I have is just a brief mention of climate change, because I think when we look in this country at the challenges of climate change, most people are aware that Bangladesh is a country that's particularly vulnerable when it comes to that, but I think it is in many ways illustrative of the debate that we need to have, and obviously we have the rally for the love of lobby outside of Parliament today. But I think if you look at the figures, Bangladesh produces just 0.3% of global emissions, and yet is one of the countries that is genuinely most at risk of rising sea levels. The Ganges Delta has 230 rivers in it, has 160 million people living within an area 1/5 the size of France, which is almost completely flat. And any sense of justice or equity, whichever side of the political divide people are on, clearly shows us of the need to do the right things in this country this year and in this Parliament to tackle this. I think when people often ask about the consequences of climate change, it's important they realise it's not just about what it will do to countries like Bangladesh, but also about how that will affect the UK, because frankly the refugees that could be created by that, the problems of food supply, of food security that could be created by that, will have huge knock-on effects to this country as people go to places they have relatives, have relationships with. And it comes back to that fundamental point that it's very much in our interest to take the right steps as parliamentarians in this country, not just for the world, but for the UK's national interest. And I hope that is something, Sir Alan, that we will do through the duration of this Parliament. To conclude, I just wanted to say how much I warmly welcome this debate, how much I welcome the relationship between the UK and Bangladesh, and to say the message I want to send out, much like my honourable friend, is that this relationship is extremely important to us as parliamentarians. We are all friends of Bangladesh, and it is a relationship which I think will become even more important in future. Thank you.
I call Tasmina Ahmed Sheikh.
Thank you, Sir Alan. It is indeed a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. Can I also start by paying tribute to an honourable member for St Albans for a very excellent presentation, and I look forward to working with her in the future. I share mixed heritage and have therefore a background from Pakistan, who share many of the issues shared by those people in Bangladesh too. And I would like to focus my contributions today on child marriage, climate change, as mentioned by the honourable member, and climate justice. Last Tuesday, Human Rights Watch issued a report named Marry Before Your House is Swept Away, ranking Bangladesh as the 4th highest in the world for child marriage, describing it as an epidemic. 65% of young women in Bangladesh are married before 18 and 29% before 15, according to UNICEF figures. Child marriage leads to dangerously early pregnancies, a lack of education and greater chances of domestic violence and poverty, issues which are, of course, of great concern to all. Meanwhile, however, the UN has also praised Bangladesh for meeting other development goals, including reduction of poverty, gender parity in school enrolment, and reduction of maternal mortality. So, whilst meeting some development goals, the question must be raised as to what is going wrong in terms of performance in relation to child marriage. Gender discrimination has been given as one of the issues that may be responsible for this via the Human Rights Watch report. Desperate poverty, where parents can't afford to meet the cost of feeding or educating their daughters, and natural disasters caused by climate change, forcing families to adopt survival strategies, which leads me on, indeed, to climate change. Now, the Human Rights Watch... Yes, of course.
I think the Honourable Lady makes a very powerful point about marriage of women. The Human Rights Report also, as she said, made great play that for a lot of families, the option is either finding a husband for the daughter or somebody in the family is actually going to starve because of the poverty that those families are experiencing. And that's a really difficult choice of keeping the girl in the family and keeping the family together, or marrying her off and she's surviving. And that's a situation that we couldn't even countenance in this country.
And indeed, I'm very grateful to the Honourable Member for the point that he makes, and it is, we can't possibly imagine what that might be like to have to face such choices, but these are daily choices and stark choices indeed for people living in Bangladesh. And the Human Rights Watch report is quite specific in relation to comments about the child marriage rates in Bangladesh, and states that natural disasters in Bangladesh and the lack of an adequate government safety net for families affected by them compound the poverty that drives child marriage. Bangladesh's geophysical location makes it prone to frequent and sometimes extreme natural disasters, including cyclones, floods, riverbank erosion and earthquakes, which cause widespread loss of life and property damage. And some families interviewed by Human Rights Watch said that they had made decisions about marriage for reasons directly related to natural disasters. Some, for example, rushed off to marry a daughter in anticipation of losing their home to river erosion. Bangladesh, therefore, is the most vulnerable nation in the world to the impact of climate change, according to risk analysis from Maplecroft. 57 rivers enter the country at one side and drain out the other. The country has no control over the water flow and is particularly vulnerable to rises in global sea level. Densely populated with widespread poverty, little capacity to adapt and ineffective governance, the people are powerless indeed in the face of natural disaster, which leads me on to climate justice. Because the poor and vulnerable, often women and children in particular, are always the first to be affected by climate change and indeed suffer the most when it is the richer countries and populations who in many cases have caused the problem and not them. Acknowledging this imbalance is absolutely central to climate justice. Climate change threatens basic human rights to water, food, a home and education, to economic development and indeed to life itself. It reverses hard-won progress on human rights and development, and we can see that so clearly happening in Bangladesh. Climate justice puts people and a human rights-based approach at the very heart of decisions on global sustainable development. It means benefiting the environment, alleviating poverty and improving equality. The Scottish Government, Chair, is leading the way in the realm of climate justice with a dedicated Climate Justice Fund, possibly the only fund of its type in the world. The £6 million Climate Justice Fund currently supports 11 projects in Malawi, Tanzania, Rwanda and Zambia, empowering the poorest and most vulnerable communities to access their rights and to become more resilient to climate change. The emphasis of the fund is on access to clean water, enabling communities to assert their water rights and sharing best practice in natural resource management. The results, have been inspiring. Communities are brought together to work towards a better future, sickness is banished, crops are healthy and children can return to school. The Scottish Government has stimulated conversations about climate justice at national and international level among businesses, communities, academia and the public sector. Glasgow Caledonian University this year launched the world's first master's programme in climate justice. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation recognises Scotland's pioneering role. Last December it stated that within the UK, the Scottish Government continues to take a lead in putting climate justice on the international and domestic agendas with a renewed commitment to the cause of human rights and an announcement of new projects supported through its Climate Justice Fund. As Hamza Youssef, the Scottish Minister for External Affairs and International Development, has said, we aim to be a world leader and a progressive voice on the global stage. We hope our commitment to helping the world's poorest will inspire many people, both at home and abroad. In closing, I would add that the SNP manifesto of 2015 promised that we will call on the UK Government to match the approach of the Scottish Government with a dedicated climate justice fund. And this debate highlights perfectly the need for such a fund to help countries such as Bangladesh, which suffers an endless stream of disaster caused by climate change, a problem not of its own making, disaster which leaves millions in deprivation and which forces families to give up on their daughters' futures, as shown in the Human Rights Watch report. Bangladesh, like many other developing countries, is doing its very best to make social and economic progress in the face of ongoing environmental catastrophe. We can call on its government to restore full democracy. We can call for strong action on child marriage. But as first world contributors to the global climate crisis, which affects countries like Bangladesh disproportionately, we have, first of all, a very strong moral obligation to help. Will the Minister therefore promise to take a close look at the Scottish Government's climate justice policy with a view to creating a similar fund at UK level?
Thank you, Sir Alan. Pleasure as ever to serve under your chairmanship, and I congratulate the Honourable Member for St Albans for securing this debate. It's not the first time that we've debated Bangladesh here in this chamber, but she has really done an excellent job in chairing the all-party group and obviously continues to show a passion for the country. We've also heard from the Honourable Members for Poplar and Canning Town and for Stalybridge and Hyde about the importance of free and fair elections and peaceful transition from one government to another, elections that have the confidence of the international community and of the people of Bangladesh, and that's something that I will come on to in a moment. We've heard from the Honourable Member for Ockhill and South Perthshire about the very important issues of child marriage and tackling climate change. Many of us will have been lobbied by constituents today on the Climate Coalition's summer rally, and I think it's really important that we do highlight the impact on countries such as Bangladesh when we're trying to urge the government to make progress in the talks that will happen later this year. The Honourable Member for Chester made what I thought was actually a very interesting speech and perhaps a new take on this topic from the trade union point of view about labour standards in the shipbuilding yards and of course with garment workers as well. And most importantly, he name-checked his local restaurant, which is always a good move for an MP, and you'll free poppadoms next time you're in there, I'm sure.
Friend makes a very important point about name-checking, but given that Tower Hamlets is the curry capital of Britain, there are just far too many great restaurants to mention.
Maybe the Honourable Member should sort of use the next time he speaks to just give a long list, and then he'll get free poppadoms in all of them. We also heard from the Honourable Member for the cities of London and Westbrook Westminster about the plight of Hindus, which again is something that I will come on to, and about the diaspora community in his constituency and their passion for education, which is certainly something that I think for all of us who have ethnically diverse constituencies realise it's very much the case. The aspiration levels within some of these communities are extremely high. And the Bangladesh diaspora are an important part of our communities and maintain our strong links to Bangladesh, which of course are historic, as the Honourable Member for St Albans has said. The connection between our two countries was reaffirmed only this week with the visit of the Prime Minister, Sheikh Hasina, who many of us had the opportunity to meet, and she was of course in the public gallery for the maiden speech of her niece, the Honourable Member for Hampstead and Kilburn, who becomes, as has already been mentioned, one of 3 MPs of Bangladeshi heritage in the House, along with the Honourable Member for Bethnal Green and the Honourable Member for Ealing Central and Acton. And as we've heard, Sir Alan, Bangladesh has made progress on poverty reduction, and there is rising prosperity in the country. Its economy has grown by about 6% a year, despite political instability, structural constraints and the global financial crisis. Many of the Millennium Development Goals have been reached, for example, in getting girls as well as boys into primary and secondary education, although, as ever, there is always an issue about children dropping out as they get towards as they get into their secondary education, particularly for girls when marriage is perhaps on the cards. The country is at the moment heavily reliant on agriculture and on the garment industry, which the latter accounts for more than 80% of exports. We've heard about Rana Plaza, and I'll return to that again in a moment. There's potential for growth in some sectors, such as ICT, which at the moment generates around 300 million in revenue. And at a very local level, microfinance has made a real difference. I was fortunate enough when I visited Bangladesh with Results UK to meet Muhammad Yunus, the Nobel Peace Prize winner, whose microcredit system has reached out to around 7 million people, many of them in Bangladesh, and helped when the conventional banking system would not. And it was very notable there. I think he said that 95% of their loans were given to women, and it's very much women that are the driving force of economic regeneration, just at a very local level. Remittances from the diaspora community accounted for 8% of GDP in 2014, which is some $14 billion. My honourable friend, the member for Bethnal Green, has done some excellent work on this front, trying to ensure that the flow of remittances continues to countries such as Bangladesh. But I think there is still a need to look at whether remittances can be better channelled, so it's not just about subsistence and supporting families to keep their heads above, I was going to say, yeah, let's leave that metaphor, to support families just to get by on a daily basis, and whether they can actually be channelled into growth instead. As it is, Bangladesh still remains a poor country, and political violence is a major concern. Last year's elections were boycotted by the main opposition party. More than half of the 300 seats were uncontested. We saw violence on election day and arson attacks on polling stations. 21 people died, adding to the death toll after 120 people had already died in pre-election violence. And this year, with the anniversary of the election, we've seen more deaths, fires, and thousands of people arrested. Amnesty International has reported in the past of the use of excessive force, torture and extrajudicial killings by the police in Bangladesh, and questions have to be asked about the police response to the violence. I was very interested to hear what the Honourable Member for Chester said about developing policing in his conversations in his local restaurant, and the contribution we can perhaps make on that front. The opposition leader, Khalida Zia, reportedly encouraged protests in January, and the minister will be aware that she has been charged with corruption, allegations which, of course, must be dealt with independently and in accordance with the rule of law. I hope that during her visit, the Foreign Office has been able to discuss this with the Prime Minister in more detail. Turning now to Rana Plaza, the disaster in 2013 has already been said was one of the world's most serious industrial accidents, which more than 1,100 people lost their lives and 2,500 people were injured. And it does expose the hidden costs of the clothes we buy on our high streets. The TUC and organisations like Labour Behind the Label, which is a Bristol-based organisation, have done great work to campaign for justice and reforms. And I understand the compensation target was finally reached in the last 2 weeks. The tragedy does demonstrate the importance of the ILO, and yet the coalition government withdrew funding for that organisation, and of course we have seen plans to erode workers' rights at homes too. It would be helpful if the Minister could outline how the FCO is working with Bangladesh to improve rights and safety conditions for workers, and how they're demonstrating to the international community, as well as businesses operating in the UK, that this is a concern for the government, that they recognise the importance of raising labour standards, not just internationally in countries such as Bangladesh, but also protecting them in this country too. As has already been said by the member for Rockhill and South Perthshire, Bangladesh is one of the countries most vulnerable to climate change. It produces just 0.3% of global emissions, but it is especially susceptible to cyclones and rising sea levels, threatening the lives, homes, food and livelihoods of its 160 million people. My colleague, the Honourable Member for Stalybridge and Hyde, were at a meeting with climate scientists this morning, and it's absolutely frightening to hear some of the facts and the statistics that are put in front of us, that if the world does not act on this, the impact that rising sea levels and global warming will have on, particularly on countries such as Bangladesh, but on every country in the world too. And that's why we need a strong global deal on the table at the Paris talks later this year. And why we also need action on climate change when the Conference on the Sustainable Development Goals meets in the autumn. Bangladesh warned last year they would need £3 billion over 5 years to adapt to current climate challenges, including help to build 700 kilometres of coastal defences. If this isn't done, by 2050, rising sea levels could cover 17% of Bangladesh, displacing millions and potentially forcing 50 million people to flee. If any more incentive were needed, and again, this is a matter that the Honourable Member from the SNP touched on, we have to look at the wider impact of climate change. According to Human Rights Watch, 29% of girls in Bangladesh marry before the age of 15, despite the fact that it is illegal to do so. That's more than in any other country. By the age of 18, 65% of girls are married, in part because of poverty and lack of access to education. And climate change... just at the end of the sentence, climate change is another driver of that, with, as we've heard, parents marrying off their young daughters after losing their homes or crops to floods or soil erosion.
One place, thank you, Honourable. One place the APPG visited was the Institute for the Paralysed, and when we were there, we saw many children who looked like they had cerebral palsy, and they were a result of maternal births going wrong, and as a result of many young women having births. And so it's very important that young women are protected from entering into having young children at such a young age.
Terry McCartney.
Yeah, the Honourable Member makes a very good point. I mean, the parents may see marriage as a way of securing their daughter's future and a better life for their daughters, but too often they suffer abuse in marriages. But even if that's not the case, the physical risks of giving birth at such a young age can be very bad indeed. As I mentioned, it's illegal in Bangladesh. Child marriage is illegal, and the Prime Minister did make some encouraging commitments at the Girls' Summit in London last year. Reports indicate, though, that there has been little progress on her pledges, and there has been some discussion about the legal age for marriage being reduced in Bangladesh. The UK government was quite rightly lauded for hosting that summit, so I hope the Minister will be able to update us on how they've been trying to maintain the momentum from this and trying to get Bangladesh to deliver on the commitments that were made there. As the Honourable Member for Cities of London and Westminster mentioned, there is serious concern about the persecution of Hindu communities and the decline of the Hindu population in Bangladesh. Freedom of religion and expression are a grave concern. Earlier this year, we saw 3 secular bloggers hacked to death on Bangladesh's streets. Obviously, those responsible for such horrendous acts must be brought to justice, and the government must protect the rights of religious minorities and atheists in Bangladesh, as well as its majority Muslim population. We've seen bloggers, Facebook users and human rights organisation officials being arrested because of what they've put online. The FCO did list freedom of expression on the internet as one of its 6 human rights priorities, so perhaps the Minister will be able to advise us on whether this continues to be the case for the new government, whether they still have those 6 priorities, and on how they've been working with Bangladesh to support reform in this area. Abolition of the death penalty was, of course, another of the FCO's priorities, and the UK must continue to push for a moratorium in Bangladesh, as we do elsewhere. Finally, Sir Alan, one area where Bangladesh has been less proactive is the boat crisis involving Burmese and Bangladesh migrants. We've discussed here before our concerns that Bangladesh has returned Rohingya fleeing persecution in Burma and blocked aid agencies from having access to Rakhine State in Burma. The international community is now horrified by the discovery of mass graves and scenes of migrants from both Burma and Bangladesh packed on board ships and risking their lives in search of a new home in Malaysia, Thailand or Indonesia. I know that the Minister responded to a debate in the Chamber, I think it was only last week or the week before, an adjournment debate on the situation in Burma. But Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina has dismissed the Rohingya as economic migrants who are mentally sick and said they should be punished as they are tainting the image of the country. So I'd be grateful for him to comment on the situation from the Bangladesh perspective as well. I hope that the Minister will agree that the international community needs to not only address the immediate crisis in the Andaman Sea, but also the underlying issues that are forcing people to flee their homes in Burma and Bangladesh. And Bangladesh is, of course, part of these discussions about citizenship for Rohingya and whether they can eventually be given the rights of citizenship in Burma. I regret that my remarks may appear rather negative. I did start off by saying that there is much to be positive about in Bangladesh in terms of its future, but I think it is important, in the spirit of friendship, as other members have said, that we do highlight some of these issues so that we can work on them and with the common shared history, with our role in the Commonwealth, work with Bangladesh to address some of these issues. Thank you.
Just wondered if you have approximately 15 minutes to go. If at the end of the debate you could find time, a little bit of time, just to give us it back so that Ms Main might just respond to the debate so far and thank the members for their participation. Minister.
Thank you, Sir Alan. I shall certainly try and do as you suggest. But I would like to start on that subject by congratulating my honourable friend, the member for St Albans, both on securing this debate and for her return in almost universal acclaim from all sides of the House of the work she's doing on the all-party parliamentary group on Bangladesh. I commend the commitment she and indeed all the group's members, some of whom are with us here this afternoon, have shown over the years to strengthening and deepening our relations with Bangladesh, as well as encouraging development in many areas, from human rights, economic and social development to educational and trade links. Alan, over 16 months ago, in January 2014, this House had a debate on Bangladesh immediately after its 10th parliamentary elections. Those taking part in that debate expressed concerns over the high levels of violence and disruption, the removal from Bangladesh's constitution of the provision for a caretaker government following the annulment by the Supreme Court, and the consequent lack of participation by some of Bangladesh's political parties in the elections. Indeed, as we know, before a single vote was cast, just over half of all seats were declared, meaning that 46 out of 92 million voters were deprived of choice at the ballot box. But while this was deeply disappointing, the UK recognised that elections had been held in accordance with Bangladesh's constitution, which had indeed been amended by Parliament in 2011. And whilst it is not for the United Kingdom to prescribe the constitutional provisions of other countries, I should add that the experience of the caretaker government system was not without its flaws and was also open to criticism of manipulation and abuse. It is certainly not the panacea or path to participatory democracy that some have claimed. Since then, alongside our international partners, we have encouraged Bangladesh's political parties to take bold steps towards building much-needed confidence, mutual understanding and cooperation as the only way for Bangladesh to remain on a strong democratic path with full political participation in order that the people of Bangladesh continue to have political choices. And that's the message I have conveyed personally in my engagements with Bangladeshi ministers. It was, therefore, Sir Alan, deeply concerning when the situation deteriorated in Bangladesh earlier this year. We have seen the restrictions on public gatherings around the first anniversary of the 2014 elections, coupled with the nationwide transport blockades and enforced labour strikes declared by the Bangladesh Nationalist Party, outbreaks of violence and disruption, over 100 deaths, horrific arson attacks and many more injuries, opposition and activist arrests, and a tough law and order response that saw a number of fatalities. On the 5th of March, I issued a statement calling for a peaceful way forward. And preparations for city corporation elections in Chittagong and Dhaka in April, which presented a real opportunity for Bangladesh to focus on democratic processes once more, were an opportunity lost after the BNP withdrew partway through, citing widespread irregularities. The Election Working Group, an umbrella NGO body that the UK, amongst others, supports, found Election Day to be marred by significant levels of electoral fraud and violence, and judged the elections not credible. We and many other international partners called for all allegations of irregularity to be investigated swiftly and impartially. Sadly, Sir Alan, that does not yet seem to have happened. Why? Why do we do this? Because we care desperately, the UK cares desperately about Bangladesh, and we therefore continue to urge the political parties to do the right thing by Bangladesh's future. So, like any modern, vibrant democracy, Bangladesh must protect and promote civil society and human rights, not least freedom of expression, whether this is through peaceful protests on the streets, for media commentary or digital expression. No one should fear reprisals for expressing a view, and I associate myself closely with the remarks by my right honourable friend, the member for Westminster, about the importance of a secular society. The recent horrifying and brutal murders of 4 bloggers in Bangladesh cause consternation around the world. The perpetrators must be brought to justice, and the Bangladeshi government must be unequivocal in protecting those who speak up. We're also deeply concerned over allegations of extrajudicial killings and enforced disappearances. Again, where allegations are credible, we call on the government of Bangladesh to hold the perpetrators to account through impartial, transparent investigations. I should here note the final verdict yesterday in Bangladesh's Supreme Court Appellate Division confirming the death sentence against Jamaat Secretary General Ahsan Mujahid for crimes committed during the 1971 Liberation War. While I fully understand the strong desire to bring those who committed terrible atrocities finally to account, the UK remains strongly opposed to the use of the death penalty in any circumstances. Bangladesh has a strong network of NGOs, all contributing to Bangladesh's future in a range of sectors, from supporting women's and children's issues to food security to poverty alleviation. We regularly engage with the government of Bangladesh to ensure they support the vital work of these organisations and that they address legitimate concerns, including revisions to new legislation governing NGOs. The Honourable Lady, the member for Ochil and Perthshire, commented on the Human Rights Watch report published, Married Before Your House is Swept Away, and the Honourable Member for Poplar and Limehouse referred to elements within that report about girls getting married off so others could eat or be educated. And we welcome the commitments made by Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina at the Girls' Summit last year to end marriage under the age of 15 by 2021 and under 18 by 2041, with 2/3 of women, Sir Alan, in Bangladesh currently married before 18. It is hugely important that the new Child Marriage Restraint Act sets the minimum age for marriage at 18 with no exception, and we continue to discuss with the government of Bangladesh our concerns towards the proposed legislation to lower the legal age for marriage. We also invest heavily in Bangladesh's development. UK aid stands at £191 million a year to support that aims to lift 1.5 million Bangladeshi citizens out of extreme poverty, provide access to safe water for 1.3 million, and ensure the 500,000 boys and girls complete primary school education. My honourable friend asked how the UK aid schemes are audited. It is complicated, this, and I will ask my colleagues at the Department for International Development to write to her, but I can assure her that none of our aid is paid as direct budget support to Bangladesh's government. And on the issue of climate change, which is also hugely important, of course, to Bangladesh, I would just remind the House that the government set up the International Climate Fund to provide £3.87 billion between April 2011 and March 2016 to help the world's poorest adapt to climate change and promote cleaner, greener growth. Honourable members quite rightly raised the devastating collapse 2 years ago of Rana Plaza and the loss of over 1,000 innocent lives, many of them women. We welcomed the all-party parliamentary group on Bangladesh's report and indeed its recommendations. The garment industry in Bangladesh has played a pivotal role in Bangladesh's development by helping to reduce poverty and empower women. Significant steps have been taken to improve building safety and working conditions, but there is, of course, still much more to be done. All the parties involved in the supply chain, including government agencies, building owners, factory owners, and the international brands, need to share responsibility for ensuring that change happens. The UK is providing £7.4 million to fund factory inspections, train new inspectors, strengthen factory health and safety, help garment workers understand their rights, and help survivors of Rana Plaza to find new jobs or start their own businesses. We are pleased, Sir Alan, that the Rana Plaza Fund, $30 million, has now been fully met. Primark's contribution to an additional $13 million on top of its $1 million donation to the fund is particularly noteworthy and will help ensure victims and their families are properly supported. The Honourable Lady, the member for Bristol East, speaks for the opposition on these matters, raised the issue of the migrant crisis in the Bengal and Andaman Sea. I did discuss this with the Permanent Under-Secretary from the Bangladesh Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I urge Bangladesh to take steps to improve border security and address the root causes of the crisis in Bangladesh. He invited me to go with him to Cox's Bazar and Chittagong and see for myself what is going on there, and I very much hope to take him up on that offer. It's worth saying, Sir Alan, in parallel, UK aid is providing £4.79 million for food security, livelihoods and relief coordination for the Rohingya and host communities in Bangladesh. This is in addition, of course, to the very significant existing UK aid programmes in Rakhine itself. Before I draw to a close, Sir Alan, it's worth reflecting on the recent visit of Indian Prime Minister Modi to Bangladesh. It's important that countries in the region collaborate to ensure the region's long-term stability and prosperity. We therefore welcome the long-overdue ratification by the Indian Parliament of the 1974 India-Bangladesh Land Boundary Agreement and the 2011 Protocol. This will make a significant difference to the lives of tens of thousands of citizens living in enclaves on either side of the border. We hope that this historic agreement, along with other Bangladesh-Indian bilateral agreements made during Mr Modi's visit, paves the way for even more, for example, on Teesta water sharing. And incidentally, already, in the light of these boundary realignments, it has unleashed a whole tranche of Indian investment, long overdue, in fact, into the infrastructure, which I think the Honourable Lady was alluding to earlier. It's important that all countries in South Asia continue to play a role in tackling the threats of terrorism, extremism and radicalisation. I therefore welcome Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina's commitment to eradicating terrorism, though important that when countering risks, law enforcement agencies do so transparently, fairly and within the bounds of the law. So to conclude, Sir Alan, the United Kingdom values its relationship with Bangladesh deeply, and the 440,000 plus people of Bangladeshi origin in the UK make an enormous contribution to British society. That's why the government will continue to work closely with Bangladesh on its democratic path as it grows to be a strong and more prosperous nation that benefits all of its people. And I thank again, on behalf of the whole House, the work of my honourable friend, the member for St Albans, and other honourable members of the committee for the opportunity to debate these important issues today and for their continuing interest in furthering relations between the UK and Bangladesh.
Thank you, Minister. Mrs Anne Main,
well, thank you,
just
Minister,
point
for
out
that
to you,
response.
Mrs Main, that we're about to have a vote at 4 o'clock, so if you can make your summary short.
I shall do. Thank you, Sir Alan, for that guidance. I thank all members who've participated today. It's been a model debate in terms of the friendliness expressed by people across the House and for all parties, and I thank people for their contribution. I think the Minister for the response he's given us today, and he's given some thought as well about the election irregularities that he's asked to be investigated, and I really hope that is the case, because I think it is this helpful pressure that we're putting on all political parties in Bangladesh that will move this forward. And I would like to say I think that the APPG certainly has already expressed a desire at its inaugural meeting to potentially look at flooding. I think it was the Honourable Member, I'm afraid I can't remember her name, Catherine West, but which constituency she really wants to look into this. I think infrastructure resilience is hugely important in Bangladesh, and it is going to be critical if the country is going to grow, that it moves itself forward with that infrastructure upgrades that it so desperately needs. So I thank the Minister today for that response, and I'm sure we will be asking him in future again for some further updates.
Order, order. That concludes the hearing of the committee, the debate. Can I just point out to members that it hasn't yet been called, but it's expected in a few seconds' time that there'll be a vote at 4 o'clock. If that is the case, the next hearing won't start till 4:15. So there's going to be a vote. Yes.
Suspend until 4:15.